The Greater Faydark is a vast forest containing many different creatures. Animals and monsters roam the woods, and wise travelers go in numbers and stick to the caravan road. At either end of the road is a city, Kelethan of the Wood Elves to the west, and High Elven Felwith to the east. But a third city of sorts exists in the great forest, though few travel there of their own free will. A home of the Orcs and a bane to virtually all others in the area. Crushbone. Those who have heard the name and the stories assume that Crushbone is merely a large keep, or that it is a camp of orcs from the Crushbone clan. Both of these are accurate, and yet neither is complete. The difficulty for outsiders lies principally in two facts. First, the name Crushbone is used separately for clan, city, and keep. And second, few who visit Crushbone ever leave. Legends. Orcs are not without their own histories and myths, and the Crushbone clan is no exception. Their shamans tell of a time long ago when the forest covered the entire land and when walking trees protected it. But the orcs came to Faydwer, along with their kin the ogres and the trolls, and began felling trees and building keeps. The walking trees rose up against them and drove them back, but not before a large space to the south had been cleared. Then the trees caused a tall, treacherous mountain range to appear, cutting the orcs and their brethren off from the remaining woods to the north. The mountains were too difficult to scale, so the orcs contented themselves with building keeps in the southern area, cutting down every tree they could find. Centuries passed, and the orcs grew more numerous. Finally, the leaders of one clan, Crushbone, declared that they were heading north to seek more space and more prey. That meant entering the forest, and the clan talked several others into joining forces with them on this endeavor. The orcs began to hack their way through the forest, heading straight north to where the forest was thinnest. The walking trees came after them, of course, but by the time they had mobilized, the orcs already carved a swath right through the forest and had reached the northern shore of the continent, and thus the forest became two. Still, the Crushbone clan was not done. Many of its allies chose to settle in the northern coastal area, but the Crushbones had been cowed by the trees once before and refused to accept such humiliation a second time. "We cannot let the forest defeat us," their leader declared. "We enter the forest itself and settle there, and no tree will tell us different." The rest of the clan had its reservations, but their leader killed those who opposed too loudly, until soon everyone agreed to follow his plan. They admitted that living within the forest would protect them from rival clans, who would probably be afraid to enter the woods. The Crushbones set out eastward, exploring the woods and slaughtering any creatures they encountered along the way. This continued for several weeks. Then a scout returned and announced that he had found a great hill. This was the first non-level spot they had seen in the forest, and the clan eagerly gathered there. Upon closer inspection to the orcs' delight, it was more than a simple hill the scouts had discovered, for around the low, broad mound was a shallow bowl, and beyond the bowl the ground rose up again slightly, as if forming a low wall. Through this bowl ran a river, which split into several streams as it entered the depression, and then merged again on the far side. "This is our home," their leader announced. "It has water, it has height, it has walls. Here we will live." The orcs immediately began to set up camp. They very soon discovered one problem with their new location, however. The Wood Elves, their hated enemies, had also settled in the woods, and their home, Shadowwood Keep, was only a short distance north of this site. "We must kill the elves before they come after us," the Crushbone leader announced. The orcs, always prepared for battle, marched late that very night to Shadowwood and surrounded it. The battle was brutal and short, and the orcs easily conquered the surprised elves. Then they set fire to the keep and returned to their own camp. But not all of the elves had died. A few had escaped, and they had gone in search for help. It took the scattered elves 3 months, by which time the Orcs had begun building walls and a keep of their own, all made from the trees that had grown on that hill. Then the elves struck with allies, brownies, pixies, and other fae, as well as a few humans and dwarves they could find. This time, it was the Orcs who were surprised and overwhelmed. The battle was fierce, but by the end of it, many lay dead on both sides, and the Orc keep had been burned to ash. The Orcs did manage to repel their attackers, and finally, the surviving elves retreated, but not before slaughtering the Orcs' leader. Once the elves were gone, the Orcs regrouped. Their dead leader's son, Crush, assumed command of the clan. Only 2 Orcs objected, and he killed both of them with his bare hands. "They will not drive us out," he told the others. "We have claimed this spot as our own, and now our people have spilled blood and died for it. Let them come at us again. We will be ready." Then the remaining Orcs, still numerous, began building in earnest. The earth around the edge of the site was dug up and piled atop the existing ridge, creating an earthwork wall with a ditch before it. The streams of the rivers were deepened, transforming them into channels, and rope bridges were installed, limiting the places where invaders would cross. The central hill was made taller, and a keep was also rebuilt, but not from weak flammable wood. Crush took the many bones of both orc and elf found about the area and had them baked into bricks made with dead tree matter and clay dug of the river's edge. He transformed the site into a true orc city and declared himself emperor of the region. History. For the past few centuries, the elves have tried to rid the forest of the orcs. They have never succeeded. The Crushbone clan is too firmly entrenched, and their city is too well fortified for anything but a full-scale army to have any success. And although Kelethin is a good-sized city, it simply does not have enough warriors to form an army, especially since it cannot afford to leave itself undefended. Because of this, the orcs have survived almost without attack. Scouts and raiding parties are often assaulted out in the forest itself, but Crushbone has been left alone by the elves and their allies. Over the years, they have continued to expand and improve their city so that it has grown larger and stronger over time. To the natural defenses of their hill, they have added fortifications and other advancements, several of them quite clever. Those who have captured and questioned orcs have been surprised to hear them refer to Emperor Crush as their current ruler. Many worry that the orcs have found some way to live forever, and that this is the same ruler who first founded this orc city. This is not the case, however. The orcs have a long-standing feud with the elves, it is well known, and also with the fae of the forest. But the orcs, while savage-seeming, are not stupid, and they have not felled trees far beyond the city. The first Emperor Crush recognized that the trees provided shade and cover, and that cutting them down was a waste of energy unless their wood was needed for something. Instead, he concentrated on the city itself, and particularly on his keep, Crushbone Citadel. Crushbone is roughly pentagonal in shape. The only entrance to the city is a gate cut into the middle of the southern wall. The river, which the orcs have named Bloodwine because it appears as dark as blood in the low light of the forest, enters Crushbone from the north and flows in several channels through Crushbone. Then eventually exits the city at the western corner of the south wall. The city itself has been largely cleared of trees, but the forest's great broad roots still stand only a short distance from the outer edge of the walls. As a result, there is little, and in some places no, canopy above Crushbone, so normal light does shine down in places for a few hours, surrounding the high sun each day. In other parts of the city, only sparse light trickles down, with shadows falling everywhere, and the light throughout Crushbone is generally a bit brighter than in the forest just beyond. Government. Emperor Crush rules the orcs as their absolute leader. The current Crush is the 22nd emperor of that name. Every time a new orc ascends the throne, he changes his name to Crush. On one occasion, the new emperor was actually a female, and she still went by that name. This creates a sense of continuity for the clan and fosters their enemies' belief that the orc leader is somehow immortal. Although Crush is their commander, Crushbone has become too large and too populous for one orc to handle every decision. Instead, the Emperor relies heavily on his 3 wardens. These orcs speak with the authority of Crush himself, saving only that they cannot contradict his direct orders. If 2 wardens issue conflicting commands, the Emperor hears the debate and makes the final decision. Currently, one of the wardens, Chokehold, is in charge of trade. The second, Bonefire, handles defense, while the third, Blood Gurgler, oversees day-to-day operations like managing food delivery and overseeing new construction or repairs. This frees Crush to worry about expanding the city and to plan attacks on the Orcs' enemy. Beneath the wardens are taskmasters, equivalent to legionnaires. These orcs have been entrusted with specific tasks or areas, and they all report back to one of the 3 wardens. Often, the taskmasters are summoned to report to all 3 wardens and the Emperor at once, so that everyone in charge knows of any important developments. The only orc in all of Crushbone who report directly to Emperor Crush and not to the wardens are the Warlord Darish, the Thaumaturge, and the Prophet. Each of these 3 holds an equivalent rank to the wardens and deals directly with the Emperor. Emperor Crush and the wardens meet every evening over dinner to discuss the events of the day. The Warlord, the Thaumaturge, and the Prophet often join them for dinner and update the others on activities in their particular domains. Although he trusts his assistants to take care of the matters, the current Emperor likes to remain informed. He also realizes that the wardens are most likely candidates to take his place. The majority of Crushbone's 22 emperors, including the current one, were wardens or the equivalent before assuming the throne. Appointing a new emperor is not a democratic process. When a current emperor grows old, he appoints a new heir. This orc is often his son, or on at least one occasion his daughter, but can be anyone he thinks will do a good job as the next ruler. If the emperor dies before selecting someone, a power struggle occurs, and the most powerful and savvy orc usually wins. Choosing an heir is no guarantee that the orc will be the next emperor. Of course, as power struggles have occurred, even then, and in several cases, the heir has not been strong enough to defend the claim. The rest of the clan sees this as a good test, however, and generally supports whoever wins. Economy. Most travelers think that orcs survive merely by preying on other races, killing and looting for whatever they need. This may be true for small bands and tribes, but a city the size of Crushbone could not survive on such slim pickings, particularly not in Greater Faydark, where few people are foolish enough to travel, let alone travel anywhere near Crushbone. This does not mean the orcs don't send out raiding parties, but raiding is not their only source of food or wealth. The orcs draw much of their food from the river. The Bloodwine flows right through the city, and even though it splits into several streams, which run through channels the orcs have cut, within the basin the water still has significant force. Fish are more often swept along with the current, and the orcs have strung nets just within the wall where the river enters. Most fish are caught here, and the catch is pulled out each day and carted off to the smokehouse. To supplement their fish, the orcs hunt constantly. Few deer and rabbits dwell in the vicinity of Crushbone because of overhunting by past generations of orcs, but lizards, mice, weasels, and other small creatures can be found. The orcs' preferred prey, however, is giant bats, for these creatures provide decent meat in good quantities. The orcs have also learned a bit about the local plant life, and they harvest mushrooms, tubers, nuts, and whatever edible berries they can find. Although elves and humans would likely never believe it, the orcs also farm. Small areas along the wall have been set aside for wheat and other hardy grains, and these provide enough to make hard, flat bread for the orcs' meals. Farming is considered a demeaning occupation among orcs, of course, so only women and those male orcs too young to hunt or too old and infirm to be effective warriors are relegated to this chore. Finally, the orcs trade for any food and drink they cannot find or grow themselves. Most of their trading is with the Dark Elves, but some unscrupulous humans do deal with the orcs as well. The latter can be found off the northern coast of Faydwer, and orc parties send a troop throughout the forest, once a month to deal with these sea merchants, whom most would call pirates. Of course, trading requires either money or goods. Fortunately, the orcs have both. Only a small amount of Crushbone's money comes from raids and loot. Most of it instead is mined from within the city itself. While digging foundations for their dwellings, the first Crushbone settlers discovered gold and silver here. They searched the basin and finally located a source. A small cave led into the bedrock of the continent. This shaft has expanded and is now the entrance to the mines. Here the orcs, or more accurately, their slaves, mine gold and silver, which is then minted into bars and coins. The orcs have proven to be clever, however. They make coins that look exactly like standard elven or even dwarvish or gnomish coins, so that no one will discover the true source of the money. The Crushbone's other major commodity is slaves. They almost always try to take enemies alive, and those victims are brought back to Crushbone, bandaged or healed as necessary, and put to work. The pirates with whom the orcs trade sometimes have a use for slaves as well, as do the Dark Elves, and the orcs are perfectly happy to trade slaves for meat, ale, and wine. After all, they can always get more slaves. Crushbone is, for all its size, still the home of a single clan. That means that every orc in the city is somehow related. This makes it far easier to distribute the wealth, or more accurately, to avoid doing so. The Emperor keeps all clan monies in the Citadel. Within the city, every orc can take whatever he needs in terms of food and clothing, weapons and armor. Anything he needs that is not currently available, he can request from whoever would provide such things. Armor and weapons from the smith, clothing from the tanner, etc. Coins are not handed out except to the orcs that are set to buy from the pirates or the Dark Elves. The orcs do not draw salaries, instead they get food, clothing, and whatever else they need or require. This does not mean that none of the orcs has money, of course, but most only have whatever coins that they have themselves found or looted, or been given as a reward for good work, and possibly whatever they have made off that initial stake by gambling at bones or on events in the arena. Inhabitants. Most who live within the Crushbone are orcs, but others are also present in the city. The Dark Elves have struck up several trade agreements with the orcs, and their ambassador Devin lives within the Citadel full-time. Other Dark Elves arrive and stay for days or even weeks to handle business, so that at least 3 to 4 other Dark Elves are usually in Crushbone at any given time, sometimes staying in guest rooms in the Citadel and sometimes staying in their own boats. Wood Elves, humans, and dwarves also live within Crushbone, but none do so willingly. They are slaves, and they are kept in the slave pits when they are not working. Although the slave masters are harsh, they tend not to mistreat the slaves unduly. Sufficient food and water are provided, and those slaves who are injured are attended to, unless the injury has rendered them unfit to work. After all, the point of having slaves is to get work out of them, and an injured or starved slave is less effective. The only other regular occupants in Crushbone are the Black Wolves. Several of these beasts have been captured by orc hunters and brought back to the city, where they have been tamed, trained, and bred as hunting and attack beasts, and are used occasionally to add to the excitement of an arena match. The wolves are kept in special pens within Crushbone. Society. Orcs are a violent and warlike race, and the Crushbone clan is no exception. The orcs who live here are intelligent enough to recognize the value of subterfuge, trade, and even magic, but ultimately, they still reserve most of their respect for one thing: martial prowess. When a Crushbone orc reaches his full height, he is given a weapon such as a great club or battle axe and sent into Greater Faydark. These orc pawns, as they are called, are told to live off the woods and not to return until they have made their first kill. The only creature counted as kills are humans, elves, dwarves, giant bats, and giant spiders. The Crushbone orcs are generally not familiar with other intelligent humanoid races, gnomes, Ixars for example, because travelers of that type rarely appear this deep in the forest, but such creatures would likely be considerable for the ritual kill. Once the pawn has made his first kill, he removes the head and heart of his victim and brings them back to Crushbone. A ceremony is held, the details being too gruesome to repeat here, during which the orc is believed to ritualistically absorb the strength and cunning of his prey. Only then is this young orc declared a warrior and presented with a Crushbone belt and a broadsword. Now he is considered a full adult and an active member of the community, although he has yet to earn the rank of centurion. Adult orcs continue to measure their prowess by two things: the number of creatures they have killed and the number of humanoids they have enslaved. Though the slavers do most of the latter work, orcs on patrol or out hunting often bring their victims back alive, and these are then added to the slave pits. Older, more traditional orcs still consider this less impressive than straightforward kills. But times have changed, for Emperor Crush has announced several times that capturing a slave is to be considered every bit as valuable as killing an enemy, and just as much proof of an orc's strength and cunning. Some orcs take fingers or ears from their victim, both the necessary ones they kill and the ones they enslave, but that can be messy and the parts can get cumbersome. Because of this, the orcs have devised a new method of showing their success. Each time an orc makes a capture or kill, the victim's left top canine tooth is removed. These then have a small hole bored through them and are attached to a thin strip of leather, which is worn across the chest in bandolier fashion. This way, other orcs can see immediately how powerful that orc is, but the tooth band does not take up much room and makes no appreciable noise, for the teeth are spaced apart with soft objects to prevent them from rattling together. The most experienced and impressive orcs have filled one tooth band and started a second, which they run across their chest in the opposite direction so that the two bands cross in the center. Defenses. Crushbone was attacked by elves and their allies not long after it was first occupied, when the clan was unprepared for such an onslaught. The first Crush vowed not to let that happen again. As a result, the orcs have spent a great deal of time fortifying their city and preparing it against possible attacks. The first noteworthy defense of Crushbone is the outer wall. This was initially comprised of two low ridges that ran on either side of the hill, and the orcs used dirt and mud to link the two together and to build them up further. The resulting earthwork wall is not terribly tall, perhaps 10 feet above the surrounding forest floor, and on the inside it is a gradual slope with roughly 3 feet of wall at the edge. Beyond the wall, the dirt taken to extend the wall has been formed into a ditch, which has since been turned into hardened gully using water, fire, and pitch. From the bottom of this ditch, the walls extend upward 15 feet, and it is nearly vertical. The ditch itself is over 6 feet wide at all points to prevent anyone from walking up to the wall, and most of it has been covered over with nets and leaves camouflaging the area. Someone not paying sufficient attention could easily fall into the ditch before they realize it was there. The second defense is the trees. The trees within 4 feet of the ditch were all felled to prevent enemy from climbing too close to Crushbone's walls, but beyond that, the forest has not been harmed. The orcs have strung nets across the nearest tree trunks, however, forming a net wall 4 feet beyond the ditch by extending all the way around the fortress except for immediately before the front gate. The nets are made from stout vines and blend in with the rest of the foliage. Because of their coloration and the low light, they are easy to miss, and the unwary can walk into the nets and get tangled up in them. The third line of defense is the guard posts. At each point of the outer wall, a guard platform has been placed, not inside the city, but in the trees outside. Though orcs are not fond of climbing, the guards have resigned themselves to the necessity, and 3 Crushbone guards sit on each of these 3 platforms at all times, 20 to 40 feet off the ground, equipped with torches and horns. Their job is to watch intruders, to stop anyone approaching if possible, and to sound the alarm if the unwanted visitors are more than they can reasonably handle. The guards recognize the value of slaves and are under orders to entangle people with the nets if possible. Killing potential workers is to be saved for the last resort. The interior of Crushbone has also been designed with defense in mind. In the center of Crushbone stands the low hill that first attracted the clan to this location, along with the river flowing past it. At first, the orcs had wanted to set up their castle atop that high ground, but after the first keep had been destroyed and their leader with it, Crush took control of the tribe. He decided that the hill was too obvious a target, but instead built his stronghold, the Citadel, off to one side. The hill was leveled at the top, and a great bonfire set in the center. That bonfire has burned there ever since, maintained by the orcs, and today it serves for 3 purposes. First, it provides some light for the rest of the city. Second, it draws the attention of anyone attacking, as the single largest visible light source. Attackers would tend to assume that the bonfire is next to the Orcs' castle, and so mistakenly head towards the hill. Third, the firelight casts long, deep shadows across the ground at night, making it very difficult for those without ultravision to notice the canals until they fall into one. One of Crushbone's greatest defenses is something for which the Orcs can take no credit. The Great Thicket Maze sits not far south of the city's entrance, and runs thence towards the west, blocking passage between Crushbone and Kelethan. This enormous holly thicket is so dense that the Orcs cannot chop through it, and the gaps within are so narrow that only a single Orc can pass at a time. Further, although they help almost anyone lost inside, sometimes even Orcs, the druids who tend the thicket do not tolerate anyone trying to damage the thicket. Crushbone scouts have tried several times to find their way through the maze, but they have always given up, in short. The Crushbone city proper. It is estimated that Crushbone has a population of around 1,000 Orcs. The resources that are available to Crushbone are precious metals, weapons, slaves, and fish. Of course, Emperor Crush is the ruler of Crushbone, and the militia is filled with pawns, warriors, centurions, and then to a lesser extent, there's a handful of legionnaires, prophets, and thaumaturgists. Crushbone only has a single apparent entrance, the heavy iron gate in the southern wall. The gate is 10 feet high, matching the gate posts, and 20 feet wide, splitting in half to open. The front of it is a long ramp that crosses over a ditch, and on either side of the ramp is a large pyre that is constantly alight. The Orcs are not concerned about drawing attention to their front gate, for it is strong and well defended. A short way before the ramp is a low hill, and anyone approaching the front gate must first crest this point. The hill is one of the Orcs' more cunning devices, for it has been hollowed out and transformed into a guard post that normally houses 10 Crushbone guards. Small peepholes have been carved out in the south face of the hill, and guards are stationed to watch throughout these at all times. The Orcs can burst into an approaching foe's path in an instant, leaping up through the concealed doors cut into the curve of the hill. Crushbone does in fact have 3 other entrances. The first 2 are easily feasible to anyone scouting the city, the points at which the river enters and exits. The current is strong, however, and only a very powerful swimmer could move against it or even control his movement while being carried along. Further, both entrances have iron grates across them, and nets beyond that. The Orcs do not use these passages when necessary, for the grates are designed to be opened by the guards and the nets pulled aside for use as entrance and exit. This is not common practice, however, and does not happen more than a few times a year. The third entrance, other than the main gate, is also a water-based avenue, though this one is not visible to observers outside the fortress. This is an underground river, which is the entrance used by the Dark Elves when they visit. It is possible that some of the tunnels beneath Crushbone might lead to caves or hillsides elsewhere in the forest. Thus far, the Orcs have not found any passages that extend beyond their own walls, but they are constantly discovering new tunnels or breaking into them from old ones. Crushbone Citadel. Easily the largest and most impressive building in Crushbone is the Citadel. This is home of the Emperor Crush and his 3 wardens, and the center of the clan's power. From a distance, Crushbone Citadel is an imposing structure, triangular and fully 3 stories tall. It has 3 large towers outside the main building, all connected by walkways and halls. The tops of the towers and the main building's roof are pointed and appear almost jagged, so that the entire structure resembles a row of monstrous teeth preparing to bite a chunk from the sky. Upon a closer approach, the Citadel becomes even more gruesome, for its walls are revealed to be lumpy and uneven, rather than clean stonework. This may seem like shoddy construction at first, but is something altogether different, and far more disquieting. Emperor Crush wanted to send a message to his foes, showing that the Orcs of the Crushbone clan were not afraid of them. Indeed, he wanted to show the Orcs, true to their name, would crush their enemies' bones beneath them. And that is exactly what Crush did. He commanded that the bones of his enemies be smashed apart and baked into bricks, being used to build his castle. The lumps in the walls come from the skulls, skeletal hands, and other bones that protrude from them, as if the walls themselves were reaching out for help. Nor did Crush stop with his enemies. he also commanded that the bones of the fallen orcs be used in the walls, but with a difference. The first Crush, it seemed, was not only a warrior, but also a necromancer of surprising power. He restored his fallen kin to sentience, transforming their corpses into animated skeletons, and then he walked them into his new keep. Throughout the Citadel are orc hands, heads, and other bones extruding from the walls. Most of the other bones were broken up, but Crush insisted that the heads and hands be kept intact. In this way, the walls themselves are an effective defense, for they see when anyone enters and can reach out and restrain trespassers. Emperor Crush added one further twist to make his choice of building materials even more effective. He magically bound all the orc skeletons to himself through his crown, the Helm of the Dead. Any orc wearing Crush's helm can communicate instantly with any and all of the orc skeletons throughout the city, issuing commands to them. This means that Emperor Crush is generally, for all intents and purposes, aware of everything within his castle as long as he is awake, and can trace their movements at will. Of course, the orcs are entering or leaving the Citadel on various errands, but those of a warrior rank or higher are allowed beyond the ground floor. To make it easier to distinguish between friends and foes, all Crushbone warriors wear a belt and with a bit of orc bone embedded in the buckle. These Crushbone belts are taken from fallen orcs to be passed on to younger warriors, and the new ones are made when necessary. Again, using his helm, Emperor Crush can always tell exactly where the belts are at any time within Crushbone, allowing him to distinguish between his kin and intruders in the castle. No orc women or non-warriors dwell within the Citadel. Whenever Crush or other orcs desire female companionship, their favorite mistress are loaned a Crushbone belt for the duration of their stay. Crush's royal guards wear an additional piece of equipment that is linked to Crush's helm, for their Crushbone shoulder pads have a skeletal component to them. These pads allow them to pass the Citadel unmolested and unhindered, for most of the doors, or rather skeletal components of their frames, are under orders to not open to anyone not wearing such gear unless ordered otherwise by the Emperor. Key figures within the city of Crushbone. Ambassador Devin. Devin was dispatched to the city after his people encountered the orcs along the underground river. The two peoples soon discovered that they had several things in common. Both preferred the darkness, both liked stone more than wood, and both hated the Wood Elves and the High Elves with great passion. An alliance was suggested and agreed upon. Recently, given the ongoing success of their race's relationship, Devin was sent to Crushbone to provide a constant presence. He has the authority to negotiate further treaties and trades with the orcs and to promise them any price or goods within reason. Devin is clever. He knows that he was chosen for this task in part because he is an excellent negotiator, but also in part because his own liege feared him. Devin has the unique position among Dark Elves of being both a cousin to King Nathox Thex and a legitimate, albeit distant, cousin to Queen Christianos Thex. With strong followings among both the Ebon Mask and the Indigo Brotherhood, by sending him out of the kingdom, Nathox hoped that Devin would lose favor or that his followers would forget him. Instead, the opposite occurred. Devin has forged a solid alliance with the orcs and an actual friendship with both Chokehold and Crush. The Emperor and Devin often sit up till all hours playing games of strategy and conversing. Should he decide to claim the throne of his people, the Crushbone clan will support him fully. During his time as ambassador, Devin has also channeled more money back to his people, making him something of a hero among his growing faction. The Dark Elves who carry supplies to and from Crushbone are followers and allies of his, as much as Dark Elves can ever be allies at least, and constantly see proof that Devin is working to make their own race stronger and more dangerous. When he decides the time has come to reach for the throne, Devin will be ready. Devin is a tall, lean, handsome Dark Elf figure with smooth skin and silver white hair that he wears pulled back in a neat braid. He always wears loose, elegant clothing to conceal his fine leather armor, with his trademark long, midnight black cloak completing the ensemble. He wears his dragoon dirk openly upon his belt as a sign of his situation, but keeps his dagger hidden in his boots. Warden Bonefire. This powerfully built orc handles the clan's defenses. She is locked in constant battle with the widely respected warlord Darish, because the two of them use the same warriors for their tasks. About the only personnel they do not fight over are the Royal Guard, who do not answer to Darish at all and are utterly loyal to Bonefire, and only because she was their captain before she became warden. Bonefire is given to frequent bouts of rage, and has been known to lash out at other orcs for no fault of their own. Because she is tough enough to take almost anyone in the city, orcs have learned to judge her mood before approaching. Bonefire loves fighting and desperately wants the elves to attack so that she can use some of her defensive plans she has created. She constantly urges Crush to let her expand her defensive perimeter. Bonefire is a well-muscled orc with long pale hair, back in a scalp lock. She wears her 2 tooth bands over her chain shirt, crossing her chest like bandoliers. In battle, she prefers her massive great axe, Head Splitter. She is also quite capable of inflicting fearsome damage with her dagger from surprise, however. Warden Chokehold. Crushbone's 2 primary activities are setting up rendezvous with the slave-trading pirates off Faydwer's northern coast and negotiating trade agreements with the Dark Elves. Chokehold loves his job. He is gregarious and outgoing for an orc, enjoys meeting new people and talking, loves to bargain, and is fascinated by other orc cultures and their goods. He has proven a shrewd negotiator and has even earned the respect of Ambassador Devin. Chokehold is a middle-aged orc of average size and build. He is a warrior, as are all Crushbone orcs, but he is not particularly fearsome as orcs go. When given the chance, however, he talks to his opponents first, trying to lull their suspicions and assess their weaknesses, playing the role of a dumb orc if necessary. Only then does he strike, sudden and savage. Chokehold wears his toothband wound around his right forearm and hides his fine armor, a gift from the Dark Elves, beneath long silk robes and a fur collar. He carries a heavy belt pouch with over 100 gold coins, which he uses to convince stubborn traders that he means business. He also carries a long dagger and an ornately carved walking stick, which holds a slender but deadly sword within its hollow frame. Warden Bloodgurgler. Many orcs feel that daily affairs are less important than defense or trade, but wiser heads recognize that Bloodgurgler has at least the power of either of his fellow wardens. As the major domo of the clan, he keeps tabs on building, food production, and every form of industry, including mining. Bloodgurgler knows virtually everything that happens within Crushbone, and can control most of it if he chooses. Bloodgurgler is also in charge of the daily schedule of Citadel life, including meals, meetings, and the Emperor's schedule. No one else sees Emperor Crush unless Bloodgurgler has approved them first. Stories are still told about the Centurion who threw himself in front of Crush one day out on the training hill and convinced the Emperor to settle a dispute between the orc and his neighbor. The next day, the orc in question found himself assigned to clean the portal where the Bloodwine River rushes into the city, and was crushed when the grate somehow tragically swung down upon him. The other orcs all agreed to what this meant. Never cross Bloodgurgler, and never try to bypass him in the chain of authority. An orc in Bloodgurgler's position could easily aspire to the throne, but he really is not interested in ruling. He loves numbers and details, creating schedules and making lists. For Bloodgurgler, everything is about order and precision. The Emperor makes the hard decision and then tells Bloodgurgler to make them happen, and the Warden is only too happy to find ways to fit the pieces together. Bloodgurgler is taller than most orcs, but slightly leaner. His skin is strangely mottled, with patches of shiny black and of slate against the normal charcoal, and his scalp is completely smooth, save a single lock of hair above his forehead. He wears a suit of spiked splint mail, polished to a mirror shine and oiled so carefully it makes little sound. The teeth on his toothband have all been dipped in silver, and its considerable length is wrapped over his shoulder, and then once around his waist. In combat, he wields a broadsword, also polished until it shines, and wears a shiny brass shield on his other arm. The Prophet. Just as each emperor takes the name Crush, so each of the clan's religious leaders assumes the title The Prophet, and gives up any other name he might have had. The current prophet is an old orc, yet still hale and strong. He is intensely religious and genuinely believes that Ralisek called him to service many decades ago to help guide the Crushbone clan and to keep its people strong and warlike. The prophet spends a great deal of his time meditating, trying to divine what path Ralisek wishes the clan to take. He also spends considerable time each week writing his sermons, crafting each one to fire the clan's collective blood, and to remain his flock of Zek's truth. Warfare is life, and victory is everything. The prophet has few interests beyond religion and the general welfare and martial readiness of the clan, and has voluntarily stripped from his life most forms of external gratification. He cares nothing for wealth or fame and is not interested in material goods of any sort. His 2 toothbands are worn wrapped tightly over his shoulder and around each upper arm. He wears only a simple padded tunic over a pair of light leggings and heavy boots. In combat, the prophet wields a large broadsword. Emperor Crush's throne room. The top floor of the first tower is a single large room with a high-peaked ceiling, suspended from which is a smaller version of the huge lantern that rests atop the main keep. This lantern fills the throne room with more light than is found anywhere else in Crushbone, save perhaps on the hilltop in the center of the city. At the far end of the room is a low platform, and atop that is a massive throne carved from a single giant crystal. The throne's facets reflect the light of the lantern, casting rainbows about the room, and making the throne and its occupant almost impossible to face directly. Emperor Crush sits here regularly, sword across his knees, to listen to entreaties from visitors, reports from taskmasters, and pleas from orcs who have failed their duties or who have some personal problem they wish to settle. Several chairs stand just before the lip of the platform, facing towards the center of the room, so that the Wardens, the Warlord, the Prophet, the Thaumaturge, and even Dark Elf Ambassador may sit while Crush holds court. Around the edges of the room hang various weapons and skulls taken from the enemies of note. Directly behind the throne is an elvish bow, a blessed Faydark swift bolt longbow, and an enruned elf-made longsword, both of which were taken from the ruler of Shadowwood Keep many years ago. Just above these crossed weapons rests an elf skull, the hole where the orcish spears pierced it still visible in the center of its forehead. Short pillars of stone ring the room except for upon the dais, with enough space between them for a royal guard to stand watch, as they do while Crush holds court. Behind the dais hangs a tapestry depicting the razing of Crushbone Citadel and the buildings of the city in general. The tapestry conceals a doorway leading to a narrow stair that curves down and around following the line of the walls. Emperor Crush's chambers. There are at least 2 royal guards, more during alert periods, guarding the door to these chambers at all times. Further, the door here is commanded to open for no one, including even those with Crushbone shoulder pads. The private chambers of Emperor Crush are divided as the guest chambers by a partial interior wall. The first room is the Emperor's private sitting room, where he can relax with his mistress, whoever she might be at the time. Both long walls are covered with fine elvish tapestries, one an image of the sun-touched forest, and one presumably the Sea of Tears. The room contains 2 comfortable lounges, both covered in soft black wolf fur. Between them sits a small, ornately carved wooden table, and atop that is one of Crush's prized possessions, a chessboard made of black onyx and white marble, with pieces to match. The Emperor enjoys the game a great deal, and one of his favorite things about Ambassador Devin is that the Dark Elf has proven to be a worthy chess opponent. The Emperor's bedroom is relatively austere. Although the bed is noteworthy, its frame is of dark, rich wood, ornately carved and having silver worked into the detail. The bedside table is made of a reddish stone shot with flecks of gold and white, and on that the Emperor has a crystal decanter with matching glasses of elven manufacture, in case he desires a sip of water in the middle of the night. Beneath the bottom drawer of his bed is a battle axe and an emergency weapon. A door in the sitting room opens onto the balcony, and out here are 2 comfortable chairs and another small table, all hewn and polished stone. At times the Emperor has carried his chessboard out here, so that he and his opponent may sit and play while overlooking the easternmost canal of the city and those orcs working along the eastern bank. Emperor Crush. Emperor Crush himself is more intelligent than most of his predecessors and more cautious. While he does want to destroy the elves and their cities, he is smart enough to realize that the same Thicket maze protecting them from attack also protects him. Crush is willing to sacrifice his warriors to attain victory, but he has no intention of throwing them away needlessly. Instead, he plots and plans, seeking ways to weaken the elves and their allies, ways to strengthen his city and his clan, and ways to attack the elves when they least expect it. To his orcs, Crush is a surprisingly good ruler. He pays attention to what is happening in the clan and settles disputes quickly, if perhaps somewhat harshly, for he prefers to let each orc handle his own problems. Crush is not terribly interested in money for its own sake, although he does stockpile the clan's wealth, keeping an eye out in particular for good weapons and other items the clan can use in battle. Physically, Crush is a powerful orc, with nearly black skin and great gold-capped tusks. He wears his 2 tooth bands wrapped several times around his waist, and is never without his weapons and armor, or his helm, which is effectively the crown of the Crushbone clan, and also the clan's most potent magic item. He keeps his spellbook hidden in a secret compartment in his bedchamber. This spellbook belonged to the first Emperor Crush, but represents only his early training as a necromancer. To this day, Emperor Crush continues to rule this city and lead his orcs in this war-torn time. You can investigate this city more at your own risk, for many adventurers are never to be seen again, likely to have become slaves under the orcs' rule. This concludes our lore of Crushbone. Thank you all for watching, and we'll see you in a future lore video.